This is a Speedotron 1200 watt second pack. It's one of the really older ones, and it's actually one that I just was given. It was given to me as a gift by a photographer that's moving. This bigger item, I guess, wasn't going to make it into his move, so he needed to get rid of it, and I picked it up. And at the start, I would say that is one of the really nice advantages of working with older packs, and in this case old Speedotron packs, is that they can be relatively inexpensive, and in the case of this, sometimes for free. The probably the concern with one of these packs, especially if you're new to flash photography, or if you have an existing setup and perhaps you need to add some additional lights, is, well, how do you control the output? How do you get the exposure that you want to get? And is it really worth that hassle? So, hi, my name is Steve. I'm an amateur photographer. I use these old flashes from Speedotron and Photogenics and Bowens, and I use them primarily because they're inexpensive, and they have helped me to learn an awful lot about flash, and without spending without spending money, basically. So, what I would say also is that these packs were kind of the standard in large commercial studios when people were primarily shooting films. So that would be medium format, large format. It would be for fashion, for catalog, high-end portraiture. These packs were something that you would find in a studio, something that you probably wouldn't find in a hobbyist's home or garage. But now, because they're large, because they're not portable, because they lack a lot of the automation that you can get with a newer type of strobe, they've kind of fallen out of favor, and for that reason, they're inexpensive. So what I want to talk about in the rest of this video is how do you control the power, and try to suggest a couple of different ways that you may want to think about using one of these. So with this pack, as well as almost any Speedotron pack, there are going to be these things called outlets, and outlets are these blue plugs, and into those you plug your speed light, or not your speed light, but your flash. And in this case, you can put 6 flashes into this 1200 watt pack head. And what 1200 watts means is that you have a total of 1200 watts, and you can spread that different ways. So for example, if you leave everything on this pack as independent, or it's called isolated, then you could think of it as having 3 different zones. And so one zone, for example, on the left is going to have 400 watts of power. The middle one is going to have 600, and the one on the right is going to have 200. So if you add that up, that adds up to 1200 watts. And the other thing I would say is, if you are going to be working with one of these older packs, you probably want to be comfortable with the relationship between watt seconds and stops of light. So, at a very high level, a rough way to think of it is that when you double the watt seconds, you increase the exposure by 1 stop. So what that means, if I'm shooting with one lamp in the 200 watt second, which is the socket on the far right, and I get an exposure of f2.8, if I take that lamp or that light and plug it into the 400 watt section, I would expect to gain a stop of light. So instead of shooting at 2.8, I could shoot at f4. And likewise, if you go from 400 to 600, well, you're actually going up by half a stop in that case, because in order to double the 400 watt to get an additional stop, you'd have to go from 400 to 800. So 400 to 600 is halfway there, and so that's half a stop of light. The way that these packs are set up, though, they do allow for different types of combinations, so that you can get something other than just 400, 600, or 200. And these, if you look in the top of this image in the bottom section, there's something called isolate and combine. There's a switch for 400 and there's a switch for 200. And by toggling those switches and by looking at a diagram that Speedotron always prints on the side of their packs, you can turn the different outlets into different wattages. So it's not an infinite amount of choices that you can get, but it's enough choices that you can get that for certainly for professional photographers and high-end photographers 20 years ago, they were able to make money and get the job done. But it does take a little bit of time in order to dial in the light that you need. I guess I didn't say this earlier, but if you, again, come back to this and you're looking at the side of the pack and the outlets, and we'll use the section on the left, the 400 watt seconds as an example. If I leave everything here isolated and I plug in two lamps, two flash heads, then I'm really splitting that 400 into a 200 and a 200. Likewise, if I put in two in the 600 area, I'm splitting it as a 600, down to 300, and that 300 adds up to 600, and so on with 200 would be the section on the right. If you put two lamps in there, you'd get each lamp would draw 100 watt seconds. So that's kind of interesting that you have a 1200 watt second pack, and without making really any kind of adjustments to the switches or trying to read the chart, you can get that 1200 watt pack all the way down to 100 watt seconds. And just, as a point of reference, a normal speed light, the kind that Nikon or Canon or any of the aftermarket companies make, those roughly are 60 watts of power. So you're getting just a little bit more than a normal speed light out of this big old pack. And if you need to, you can obviously get a tremendous amount more power all the way up to 1200 watts. The other way that you can work with adjusting your exposure on these is simply by moving the light closer or farther away from your subject. So this image that you're looking at here was shot with two lights from this pack. The 200 watt seconds was for a large softbox that was very close to the top and to the front of this pack, and the 600 watt was actually for a flash head that I had behind the pack, and it's shooting through a 10-degree grid, and it's then shooting through a red gel, and then it's then shooting through a piece of trace paper. And by moving the flash head further or closer to the trace paper, I was able to increase or decrease the amount of exposure that I was getting. So it took a little bit of time to put it exactly where I wanted it, and I needed a room that was large enough for me to back the light up and as far as back as I needed to get it. But it didn't really take that long to get it set up to the point that I like this result here. And this is pretty much what you would see out of camera. There's not a lot of post adjustments being done to this image. Likewise, this image was just taken on a white background, and the light was overhead and actually to the front of the pack, and it was in this case I think I was using the 400 watts. So in that case, I probably raised the light a little bit to get it further away from the pack. And you keep in mind that when you shoot through a softbox, you're going to be losing stops of light if you shoot through a scrim or like the trace paper, if you're shooting through a grid, if you're shooting through any kind of gel, you're going to lose light. So some people would think, well, if you have way too much light, like 1200 watt seconds perhaps could be, do you really need it? And I would say, well, you can dial it down if you need to, but if you also are getting kind of creative with your lighting setup, and you have gels and scrims and grids and all that kind of good stuff, similar to what I was trying to get across here, then yeah, it is nice to have the extra power, because you're going to use it up by having all of those things between your basic flash bulb, if you will, and your final image. So I think that if I were starting out as trying to make money, or I also believe that if you're trying to jump from a on-camera flash, the strobist type, the 60-watt second type, if you will, to something that allows you to attach modifiers, say soft boxes or bigger umbrellas, or my favorite is to shoot through a scrim, because it allows a lot of flexibility. Then you can get into a system like this, which was and still is very professional, and you're going to learn a lot about different ways to set up light and how to control the light. And if you're already doing work, say as a food photographer, I'm going to guess, probably have your recipe of the way you set up lights and the exposure you're going after. You're probably already using scrims. And, to jump to something like this, the thought process would be, well, you want to save money, and the thought process perhaps would be that you want to get consistent results from flash to flash. In other words, the color temperature is going to be the same. In other words, when you fire the flash, it's going to fire, and so on and so forth. So I'm probably going to put out a couple of more videos, maybe talking a little bit about some of the modifiers that go along with Speedotron, including scrims and things like that. I would maybe also talk a little bit about ways that you're going to sync these. In this case, I'm just using a Wien sync, but there's other ways to sync them. You can sync them to any kind of radio trigger as well. Hope that helps.